I've never begun a broadcast with more trepidation and doubt. For I'll be putting at times severe demands on you, the viewer, which may not be to your liking. Perhaps it's the subject matter we'll explore, perhaps it's my glaring lack of imagination and storytelling skill. Either way, at the beginning here, I must beg your indulgence. September 11th has transformed each of us, and me, I'm still aghast at these acts of human cruelty, saddened deeply at the losses, and angered at the innocents targeted. Yet, I'm unable to join my fellow Americans in their newfound patriotism. We wave that flag of ours, the other end of which has been eaten, spit up, coughed up, choked on, planted through the hearts of East Timor, Laos, Chile, Guatemala. Treasonous words, perhaps, from one who stands sidelined while American troops are in harm's way, preserving the freedom I have to run my mouth. Yet, let me make clear from the outset here that bin Laden has blood on his hands and must be brought to justice, along with his networks in those harboring countries. It's just that blood is on our hands as well. Sad as it is to recognize, furious as it will make you to learn of it. I invite you here to consider the possibility of an expanded dialogue. Please be patient. Get comfortable in your seat. We will not be leaving this apartment. Tonight's show examines American foreign policy over the last 35 years, my lifetime. I'm sorry to use the words foreign policy, and I warn you I will use other uncomfortable words, such as history and geography and even Cold War. But I promise, in the end, you'll feel good, real good. Thinking of Kissinger brings me to the place in my ears where I hear the yelling and screaming of threats and insults that my parents exchanged nightly. Soon I would hear other voices in my head, mostly in the mornings when I woke to get ready for school. These voices I'd negotiate with, so that by the time we said the Pledge of Allegiance, I had commanded these voices to hush. I needed to concentrate for class. First grade, 1970. At the same time I was learning A, E, I, O, and U, Henry Kissinger was personally supervising a mass killing whose horror and illegality were on a scale never seen here before. He was conducting warlike slaughter on two countries that bordered Vietnam, two countries with whom the USA was not at war. Also at the same time, my sister was in the 5th grade, and her class was learning about America's most brilliant and beautiful creation, the US Constitution. This most sacred document is the blueprint of our nation. It spells out in great detail how our government is set up and how it is to run. It is both our civic Bible as well as the operating system of our everyday lives, whether we know it or not. My sister was taught the built-in checks and balances of the Constitution, which prevent one branch of government from accumulating too much power. Do you recall memorizing any of that? I think I do. The executive branch is the president, the legislative branch is the Congress, and the judicial branch is the Supreme Court. Now, each branch of government has specific, separate, finite, often conflicting duties. It's a genius design from the 1780s, which promotes balance, keeps everyone in check, and safeguards against too much power falling into too few hands. This preserves our democracy even today. I will give you an example. It's the explicit responsibility of Congress to make and declare war. Only this body, elected by the people, can perform this most difficult of duties. The president is the commander-in-chief of the military. This is true, but he acts only at the behest of Congress regarding the making of war against foreign powers. And underlying all of this, the oath of office all senior government officials take. And to what allegiance do they swear? The Constitution, of course. Not an allegiance to a person or a king, not an allegiance to a group of people or a bank. I promise to uphold the Constitution. This is their most solemn oath. Why does Congress have the explicit responsibility to make and declare war? Why? Because war and its real consequences should be examined, weighed, pondered, debated by our elected body, not by an appointed national security advisor. And yet our Constitution was ignored, disregarded, circumvented, made illegitimate when Henry Kissinger organized the illegal bombings of Cambodia and Laos. Secret warfare is illegal. Congress makes war, not Kissinger, and he knows this. He was a history teacher before he got into politics, so he knows our Constitution. He can't plead ignorance, yet he does. It is also illegal to target civilian populations in warfare. International law, which we helped author, clearly prohibits this. In fact, the weapon of choice for these operations was the B-52 bomber, notoriously inaccurate, which means it misses its target and hits innocent people. This is common knowledge. Everyone knew this. And yet, before the Senate, under oath, Kissinger testified that he did not know civilians were there, residing in a country. Wait until I tell you how many were killed. But first, let's get something clear for once and for all. Over the years, we've been fed inaccurate images of Vietnam through silly Hollywood movies. We're led to believe that this war was one huge disorganization, murky, demonic, pure anarchy. This is completely untrue. We had the most advanced methods of communication and surveillance. Kissinger had perfect information. The senior officials on the ground and in Washington had perfect information. Their tactics may have been faulty, their mission erroneous. But our impression of Vietnam as one huge mindfuck labyrinth only gives people like Kissinger an excuse to say, wow, I didn't know what I was doing. It was all so dark and confusing. Bullshit. Yes, dark and confusing for the people getting bombed, or dark and confusing for the soldier on the ground, but not dark and confusing for the White House staff. They just hope that our misimpression of Vietnam as a stumbling bad acid trip with a soundtrack from Jim Morrison and the Doors will only trick us into thinking that they, the policymakers, were also in the dark when committing these murders. Don't believe it. So finally, how many civilians were killed in Cambodia and Laos, and by whom? An act of Congress or a rogue appointment working with America's most corrupt president? Our civilians killed reflects our own capacity for bloodshed, and whether or not Congress approves this reflects if our Constitution is being obeyed or not. And remember, whomever willfully defies our Constitution seeks to weaken our democracy and thus destroy our American way of living. This person is a traitor. This is not some retro-liberal rehash of a dark and painful period of American history. Hey man, it's the 70s, get over it. No, I won't get over it. Henry Kissinger committed 2 large crimes here, targeting civilian populations for mass annihilation and subverting our Constitution, and never has he uttered anything resembling an apology or a plea to be forgiven. Cambodia, Laos, little countries, right? Inconsequential countries, right? You can't even find them on a map, right? Ready to know how many were killed? Are you ready? A total of 950,000. Cambodia, 600,000. Laos, 350,000. A total of 950,000. And these missions, like all military missions, had cool, groovy code names. They were known as Operation Breakfast, Operation Lunch, Operation Dinner. There was even an Operation Snack. Isn't that cute? Is that supposed to be funny? Cambodia and Laos, 950,000 civilians killed. The World Trade Center attack, 3,000 civilians killed. That's what terrorism is, war against civilians. We think bin Laden a murderer and a pussy, and he is. He hides in some safe place directing military attacks against innocent, unarmed people. 3,000 Americans lost on September 11th. As always, we must remember those people. Never forget those people. That day, like no other. Now imagine 317 days of that identical attack on the World Trade Center. 317. That same attack repeated day after day for 317 days in a row. September 11th turns into the 12th, then the 13th, and the 14th. Remember the images, people running for their lives or else killed on the spot. Another attack on September 15th, then the next day another, and the next day another. We're into October now, 3,000 killed every day of that month. Unarmed fathers and sons, mothers, daughters, wives, husbands, sisters, brothers. November, December, the same attack and its exact toll. The holidays have passed, happy holidays. Now January, February, March, relentless. April, May, June, relentless. Summertime in New York, happy 4th of July. The blazing New York summer sun blackened like an eclipse from all that smoke. Finally, After 317 days, it ends. The shrieks, the fireballs, the shattered lives. By the end of July, we're at 950,000. So, now what? How many candles to light? How many makeshift altars to set up on all the street corners of all the world? Let us now, even at this late date, reach across land and water to grasp hands of our cousins, the Southeast Asians. Let us mourn and lament, and let us finally apologize. And I recall those voices in my head before the school bell rang, first grade, 1970. Were they really voices at all? Or were they the muffled cries and screams of other school children far away, trying to get our attention here, trying to find audience here? Like you, my friend, I find myself in bed nights, unable to sleep, staring up at the ceiling. I seek every diversion possible. I watch too much news, read too many movies, and the internet, once an itch, has since turned into a rash, now finally an infection. On the night of the World Trade Center attacks, very late, I called Kelly, my ex-wife. She lives in Oregon now. She was once an actress. Not a famous one, but a good one. 2 years ago, she decided to leave. I helped her pack. And as we stood outside the house by the curb, hands buried deep into our pockets, we tried once again to figure out what went wrong. We were frozen, mute, all cried out. All I could do was ask her to tell me one thing, anything nice. She smiled, lit a cigarette, sat on the bumper of the U-Haul and recalled a moment. Kelly'd once worked with Jack Lemmon. Not bad, huh? Like I said, she wasn't famous, but homegirl was good enough to star with Mr. Lemmon. Kelly told me how every morning on the set, Jack would kiss me on the cheek and hand me a long stem rose. Every morning of their 21-day shoot. They only had a few scenes together, but he treated her as an equal, with respect and dignity. That was all she ever wanted. I reminded Kelly of that story that late night after the World Trade Center attack. She'd forgotten all about it, but I never will. And after I hung up the phone, by sheer coincidence, almost mocking me, a Jack Lemmon movie was about to begin on cable TV. Not Kelly's movie, a different one, but I took it as an omen, nonetheless, and I watched. The movie is called Missing. Some of you know it. And it's a simple story, really. A father searches for his son who has disappeared far away from home. This film takes place in South America during the real-life aftermath of the military coup in Chile. The father, played by Jack Lemmon, discovers that his son has been murdered by Chilean soldiers who took part in that coup. Adding to his shock and disbelief, the father also learns of U.S. involvement in that coup, our support of the soldiers who killed his boy. This movie upset me, naturally. So I jumped on the internet to see what was up with Chile. Was this movie honest or more Hollywood bullshit? Sadly, Hollywood got it right this time. Two shocking revelations. The first is the date of that military coup in Chile. It's September 11th. That's right, September 11th, 1973. On that day, General Augusto Pinochet commanded soldiers, tanks, fighter jets to surround Chile's version of the White House, trapping democratically elected President Salvador Allende. General Pinochet and his military pals then told President Allende that they were taking over the government and that a plane was ready for him to board. The president must flee his own country. This he refused. And as artillery pounded overhead, President Allende made one final speech from his telephone that was broadcast over the radio. President Allende decided to fight that September 11th. Outnumbered, his front door smashed in, his killers ascending the stairs. In the end, he took a bullet instead of surrendering. And later it struck me that with all the information reported about the World Trade Center attacks on all the TV networks, as well as all the tangential reports, as well as all the odd hoaxes and coincidences that mushroomed out of this, never one mention of how our sad date of September 11th corresponds to the date we helped make famously sad for the Chileans years ago. Earlier I said two shocking revelations. The first is the date. The second is the documents, which you can now view on the internet. When I first moved to Venice 12 years ago, I'd hear talk late night at parties by people who were a little odd-looking, eccentric. Maybe they had too much time on their hands, I thought. We were partying, getting fucked up, trying to get laid, basic 25-year-old behavior. I'd stumble into a room, hear somebody going off, sit down and listen. And though I believed some of what I heard, I also reserved a lot of judgment, as if it was all part of the vibe, man, part of the background music, part of the smoke we all exhaled. You may suspect, but in your heart you don't actually believe. You may think you know, but you feel comforted because you don't really know. That all changes when you view the documents. When you see the actual memos from the State Department, your eyes first notice the elegant letterhead, the symbol of the eagle, the address, Washington, D.C., the date, October 18, 1970, a letter, a government letter, official, dignified, grand. Of course I love this country. My old man's ex-Marine. I wasn't raised in no Berkeley. I wasn't raised in no Ann Arbor. I wasn't raised on a commune. But fuck if they're not right about this. Just read the documents. Now you can. A law was recently passed called the Freedom of Information Act. Its purpose is to make previously classified material available to the public to see. Many once guarded secrets are now cataloged on the internet. Just type in National Security Archive. That's National Security Archive. This archive is housed at George Washington University. Old George Washington, if he were alive today, he'd be quite impressed. Computers, the internet, what an advance, he'd think. He could actually download memos from the State Department to the CIA. President Washington could even print out these memos. And his eyes, too, would first notice the elegant letterhead. He'd feel the accompanying pride and kinship. Then he'd read on, scared shitless by what he read. I will quote one such memo sent from Washington, D.C. to Santiago, the capital of Chile. I said, I quote, "Submachine guns and ammo being sent by regular courier leaving Washington 0700 do arrive Santiago late evening. It is a firm and continuing policy that Allende be overthrown by a coup. We are to continue to generate maximum pressure toward this end, utilizing every appropriate resource. It is imperative that these actions be implemented clandestinely, so that the American hand be well hidden." I reread this document over and over, as one would read a letter informing you of a dead parent. That sick, dread feeling in the pit of the stomach. The words that link us to that September 11th, 1973 military coup. What can make us author such a memo? In 1970, Chile was arguably the most successful democracy in South America. They had a president, a Congress, a constitution, and a military that had a proud tradition of not interfering with the workings of the government. Sound familiar? Just like ours. But in 1970, the people of Chile elected a socialist to be president, Salvador Allende. American big business instantly got pissed. Our companies in Chile included Pepsi-Cola, IT&T, and Chase Manhattan Bank, as well as some copper mining interests. These business leaders became even more furious when President Allende decided that the people of Chile should own the assets of their own country, not anybody else like the US, who had set up shop there earlier. Coincidentally, Pepsi-Cola was Nixon's first big corporate account when he was starting out years before. And the head of Chase Manhattan Bank was David Rockefeller, Nelson's brother, who, as you'll recall, had very close ties to Henry Kissinger. Now, these nice people weren't about to let some leftist bastard take their revenue stream just because he's interested in helping poor people. Copper mines make a lot of money, and it's a very good score if you can get it. Sit your ass in America, take copper from somewhere else, sell it, then party with generals and judges and bankers and chicks with big tits. This is what fueled our foreign policy toward Chile, not some Sunday morning talk show jive about containment and spreading democracy. And on the morning of September 11th, 1973, our U.S. naval attaché reported that, quote, our D-Day has arrived, end quote, and that he had a close relationship with the officers of the coup, and that the coup was close to perfect. You can read this memo on the internet as well. After the coup, General Pinochet ruled with an iron fist for almost 20 years. Supported by the US government and especially Kissinger, Pinochet once boasted that in Chile, not a leaf moves without me knowing about it. Thousands were killed or imprisoned. His government had no freedom, no democracy. People couldn't speak their minds like I'm doing now without the threat of torture and murder. And we can't say we put him in power because of the Cold War. Because the Cold War was about spreading democracy and promoting freedom, wasn't it, boys? I will no longer lie awake at night and stare up at ceilings. I will read documents. Will it help? Yes. Because knowledge is freedom, and I enjoy being free. I've never begun a broadcast with more trepidation and doubt. For I'll be putting at times severe demands on you, the viewer, which may not be to your liking. Perhaps it's the subject matter we'll explore, perhaps it's my glaring lack of imagination and storytelling skill. Either way, at the beginning here, I must beg your indulgence. September 11th has transformed each of us, and me, I'm still aghast at these acts of human cruelty, saddened deeply at the losses, and angered at the innocents targeted. Yet, I'm unable to join my fellow Americans in their newfound patriotism. We wave that flag of ours, the other end of which has been eaten, spit out. Perhaps the greatest American tradition is that of the underdog, our embracing of the little man, who with courage and determination manages against all odds to triumph. We love Rocky and Amelia Earhart and Gary Cooper and Frederick Douglass. It's the fundamental expression of the individual standing up against the collective. And it shows how we can transcend the condition into which we were born. Just ask your grandparents. America was founded on the principle of the underdog. Overthrowing the British Empire was considered a very, very long shot. There exists today another underdog, one we've influenced for many years. Right next door to Australia, this very small country is called East Timor, and it's surrounded by the very large country of Indonesia. East Timor had been a colony of Portugal for over 400 years, but when it took a chance on independence, it was nearly overrun by Indonesia and its military dictator, a man named Suharto. Why do I bring this up? Because Henry Kissinger gave his blessing in our weapons to those who believe that Rocky is naive or that Gary Cooper is naive. Kissinger gave his blessing in our weapons to those who could never produce an Abraham Lincoln or a Thomas Edison or a Zora Neale Hurston. Kissinger gave his blessing in our weapons to a military despot who nearly crushed the underdog, East Timor. Picture it. A country of only 800,000, surrounded by a country of over 200 million, a fledgling democracy surrounded by a tyrant. In 1974, the independence movement was born in East Timor. It was a movement comprised of peasants and college kids who, yes, had Marxist ideas, but it also had Catholics. An odd mix, not your classic technocratic Soviet atheistic movement. Now, this left wing was characterized as a threat to the American way of life. Now, was East Timor, with its tiny population, its non-existent economy and military, really a threat to the US? Of course not. On the other hand, Indonesia had a very big economy. Kissinger does business there today. Indonesia wanted East Timor, so East Timor can fuck off. It is law that our government cannot sell weapons to a country who uses these weapons against innocent people. You can buy our shit if you're warding off an invader or defending yourself against a foe. But you cannot kill innocents in the streets with our guns. That's the law, people, period. But in 1975, Kissinger and President Ford flew to Indonesia, and there they okayed the invasion of East Timor, with Indonesian soldiers using our weapons, our high-tech weapons that our taxes helped develop. In the years that followed, over 200,000 East Timorese were killed. Remember, their population is only 800,000, so you do the math. That's 25% of their country. To repeat, on December 7th, 1975, Pearl Harbor Day, Secretary of State Kissinger and President Ford visited Indonesia and met with Suharto, and there they approved the invasion of East Timor. Kissinger and Ford flew off that very day. Moments later, mere moments later, safe in Air Force One high up in the sky, if they looked down below, they'd have seen Indonesian troops pour across the border into East Timor. A few days later at the State Department, some of Henry Kissinger's assistants wrote a memo worrying that our government was in the wrong for supplying arms to this invasion. When Kissinger got wind of this memo, he held a big meeting and yelled. Why? Perhaps because someone had dared to suggest that the US had committed crimes. I don't know, I wasn't there. But a transcript of this meeting is available if you'd like to read it. It too has been declassified under the Freedom of Information Act. Why is this transcript so important? Because at this meeting, Kissinger shows his understanding and knowledge of East Timor. He even states how in the end he'll be proven right. Well, flash forward to today, he's changed his tune. When asked about East Timor, he shrugs his shoulders and just says, wow, we barely knew where East Timor was. We had so much going on, I didn't know. So today he conveniently pleads ignorance, whereas in 1975 he was not ignorant. Also, the CIA boss responsible for that region of the world has already gone on the record stating that our government was clearly in the know and that what they feared most was not the potential massacre, but the American public outrage should our involvement be revealed. The CIA man also stated that without our military support, this invasion may not have been possible. The CIA official is no wacko spy. He's retired and lives in the suburbs. He went on the record during an interview with a reputable British newspaper. This isn't hearsay, conspiracy theory bullshit. And neither is the transcript where Kissinger shows his understanding and knowledge of East Timor. So finally, when we talk about Osama bin Laden, we use words like ruthless organizer of mass killings, a stone-cold killer with no shred of remorse. But tell me again, please tell me again, how some of our leaders are any different than, wow, fuck it. I've always been grateful for my parents. They've never overtly thwarted any dreams I had. When I moved out of the house and went to New York, they never gave me a guilt trip about not visiting home. When I moved further to California, never a sad word trying to pull me back. And most recently, when I hinted at my romantic desire to live in Paris and start over completely, I was happy that my mom neglected to mention that we'd see each other even less. She and my dad are proud that they never make demands on us kids. They never nag us about getting home for the holidays. My siblings and I have been given the gift of complete freedom, no strings attached. And this freedom has afforded me opportunities to see things I never would have had I stayed home. But what scares me is the toll we pay when we turn away from those we love. For you must turn at least part way to let someone you love go their way. A cobweb is spun around your heart. As we run off free, this cobweb can strengthen into a steely wire cage. Indifference. We need indifference, our casual telling of ourselves that it's okay if our child can't make it for Christmas. If I'm told over and over that missing birthdays, graduations, and weddings is okay, then at some level my parents and I agree to that. We agree to detach. To be completely free is to invest in indifference. As we strive to make ourselves and others purely free, our society becomes a mutual fund, a holding company of indifference. Indifference isn't stupidity. It isn't denial. It's a compact, a covenant, an accord. Do not tread on me, and I will not tread on you. But I ask you all to suspend this indifference and to recount those moments of turning away. I won't ask you to pay for them. Just remember them. And together we shall add up all those turning aways, one by one, two by two, million by million, and we shall showcase what they've added up to. The bland, boring, tedious, yet obvious fact that we, the U.S., harbor terrorists. In Georgia, at Fort Benning, a special training camp known for years as a School of the Americas. Established originally in Panama, the purpose of the School of the Americas is to train Latin American soldiers. Why do these soldiers need our training? Well, our government was looking very closely at Latin America, trying to figure out the best way to control it and keep it out of the hands of the Soviets. And also because we had big business interests there. Not diamond mines, not gold mines, not petroleum, but riches nonetheless. The crown jewel being the Panama Canal, a shipping shortcut. The Panama Canal is the gateway to many international trade routes. It's vital. I respect the idea of protecting trade and commerce because it allows me to have a job and a decent standard of living. Trade and commerce was establishing beautiful cities and opportunities for people long before the term capitalism existed. The majesty of ancient Egypt was based in commerce, and trade was the key to the great Persian empires centuries ago. The splendid East African empires hundreds of years ago was possible because of trade and commerce with India. Seville in the south of Spain flourished for centuries until a trade route, which once included its main river, was rerouted to another river in a different part of the country, bypassing the city that gave us Cervantes. I say all this to point out that the U.S. after World War II had every right to be worried about protecting trade and commerce. But here, sadly, is where our great nation failed. where it turned its back on its heritage, where it diverged from the teachings of Washington and Hamilton. In Latin America, we chose the military to protect our trade and commerce. We ignored those young leaders who believed, as Jefferson did, in democracy and freedom. By choosing the military to protect our trade and commerce, we sought to keep our American way of life. But at what price? Do we engage young leaders who will someday grow to be the James Madisons or Ben Franklins of their country? Or do we deal with corrupt cops and corrupt soldiers? Do we trust that those who are trained to use absolute power will somehow not abuse it? I will now state our nation's mission. You already know it. It is to provide security, liberty, and democracy here at home, and to do it so well that our example is sustenance to those struggling under oppression around the globe. However, by training foreign soldiers to kill innocent civilians, to protect our trade and commerce, we turned our back on our nation's mission. We insulted those who died to preserve it. We mocked it. Soldiers and their families. Now I ask you, which is more important? To be super crazy, deluxe rich, and making ourselves bastards of our founding fathers? Or can we be only very, very rich, or moderately very rich, and live the life that made our Constitution and Declaration of Independence the envy of all man? At the end of the day, this is the only question that needs to be answered. And the graduates of the School of the Americas, who have we trained? Close your eyes, take a deep breath, try your best not to be indifferent. Engage. Ready? We'll begin again with Chile. Earlier we saw our government's support of General Augusto Pinochet. It turns out we also trained Pinochet's chief of secret police. Pinochet also had secret detention camps throughout Chile where civilians were held without trial and tortured and killed. The three largest of these detention camps were run by School of the Americas graduates. 15% of Chile's entire intelligence agency was run by School of the Americas graduates. We trained them. 2 of these graduates were implicated in the 1976 torture and murder of a UN official. One of these killers later was a guest lecturer at the school. He was teaching human rights. At one point in the 80s, the commander of the School of the Americas proudly displayed a sword that Pinochet gave him as a gift. Isn't that nice? Are you sick of hearing about Chile yet? I am. How about Bolivia? They too had a military dictator. His reign of terror lasted from 1971 to 1978. Check this out. In 1988, he was inducted into the School of the Americas Hall of Fame. I kid you not, they have one. They had a ceremony for him on our soil in Georgia. Brazil had 21 years of military regimes. From 1964 to 1985, investigations there recently brought to justice the worst soldiers who committed atrocities. Many were trained by the U.S. School of the Americas. I could literally go country by country and tell you the exact same story. I could read you lists of names, the countries they're from, the years they received U.S. training, and the crimes they later committed. Manuel Noriega, dictator, Panama. Other graduates of our training camp include dictators from Peru, Argentina, Ecuador. Almost an entire continent for decades living under the shadow of military rule. We have ex-dictators coming here to be inducted into a Hall of Fame, wined and dined in Georgia, taken to Atlanta Braves baseball games, and hanging out with senators like Sam Nunn. Below the US and Mexico, The link to South America is a quilt of small, picturesque countries that make up Central America. And the last 30 years there, hundreds of thousands, civilians many, murdered, tortured, brutalized. Death squads, military dictators, paramilitaries, combo pack of the three. Guatemala, 40% of the cabinet ministers of that country's worst regimes, all trained by the US. About El Salvador, the UN investigated their horrible civil war and concluded that of all the atrocities committed, 2/3 were by soldiers trained by the US. One of these soldiers assassinated Archbishop Romero. 2 soldiers were responsible for the rape of those nuns. The UN also concluded, now listen to this, and I quote, Salvadoran exiles living in Miami helped administer death squad activities between 1980 and 1983 with apparently little attention from the US government. Such use of American territory for acts of terrorism abroad should be investigated and never allowed to be repeated. Miami. Don't remember that report on the news, do you? How about Honduras? The same thing. Death squads, death squads, death squads. Nicaragua and the Contras, more of the same thing, but with a little cocaine trafficking thrown in. Trafficking condoned by our government. That part of the story did not make it into Steven Soderbergh's award-winning film. Perhaps you're wondering what kind of training methods we taught and how some webcast jerk like me could know all these secrets. Come on, it's easy. Download it off the internet. The State Department was forced to release a copy of the training manual that was used by the Latin American soldiers. Download that off the internet. Then email me here and tell me if I'm making this shit up. Our manual tells, among other pleasantries, of who to torture, and it includes civilians, union organizers, religious worshipers. Now, when I use the word torture or the word atrocity, what do I mean exactly? I mean that I arrest you and interrogate you and pull your pants down and put live wires on your testicles, then run an electric current through your balls for 10 hours before I kill you. It means I make you my own personal ashtray. I put out 35 cigarettes on the small of your back and on your belly, leading to your vagina, before I turn you over and sodomize you, violently fucking you in the ass. It means that me and my military buddies break into your house at 4 a.m. and drag your son out of bed and blow his fucking brains out in front of you and your children. If we are training foreign young men to go home and torture and terrorize their own civilians, then we are harboring terrorists, plain and simple. A couple years ago, Congressman Joseph Kennedy sponsored legislation to shut down the School of the Americas. This legislation was narrowly defeated by only a few votes. So even Congress knows about this. They'll respond. They can't be completely indifferent if we make them listen. The School of the Americas recently has changed its name, a marketing ploy, as if they could trick us. Yet our government funds Colombia and their military, who on the side freelance and operate their own mini-militaries. They're called paramilitaries, and they're doing the same tricks that made Pinochet so famous: kidnapping, torture, and massacre. This is happening today. $1 billion aid package to Columbia, supported by Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. $1 billion funneled to Columbia and their hundreds of School of the Americas graduates who will use eradicating cocaine to cover up murders of union leaders and UN officials. School of the Americas graduates in the last couple years, even this year, were implicated in these types of crimes. So it's still going on. We train them, we equip them, and we pay them. Complete freedom is part of our credo. And freedom isn't free, we're told. This is true. There is a price to pay, but recognize indifference is part of that price. High speed, downloads, up-to-the-minute reporting, faster reporting. We're liberated. But from whom? My parents, your parents, my dad, your son, the neighbor next door you never had time to get to know. When they're moving out, you strike up a conversation with them. You're surprised. You like them after all. But you feel secure because they're leaving, soon to vanish, never to bother you for a simple cup of sugar or a button for your shirt. Indifferent, we refuse to learn geography. What are we scared of? Are you going home next Christmas? Even if your mom says it's okay. It's not okay. Get your ass home. When I was 15, some friends of mine lost their virginity deep in the woods behind the high school on a cold winter night. A keg was tapped, and after they waited in line for beer, my friends waited in line for a girl. She was drunk, of course, and mostly compliant, and she served them one by one like a ladle, serving a thin, meatless soup. I lost my virginity a couple years later to one of the 3 women I've loved terribly. She was kind and sincere. She was sweet and smart and gentle and horny. We made love and floated high up to the ceiling, like 2 gorgeous dreamers from a Marc Chagall painting. Our love and sex mixed like mescaline and Joshua tree. But I really lost my virginity after we broke up. I sought glory with strange women. I collapsed near collarbones. I rested my weary head on humid tufts of satin. I bet the last $100 of my soul on the nape of a neck. It's only natural to forsake one's first love and to expel oneself from the Garden of Eden. Curiosity, anxiety, and the will to destroy lie at the heart of any man who is charming. We're told that on September 11th, 2001, our country lost its innocence, its national virginity. No foreign agent had ever violated us before and killed on our soil. The Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, but Hawaii wasn't a state yet. and Pearl Harbor was a military target. We've experienced no bombs from planes above, no enemy troops marching in formation through our neighborhoods. We're led to believe that before 9/11, no terrorist had walked our streets planning and scheming. And certainly no terrorist was successful in their mission and murdering within our borders. We're led to believe this, but it's simply not true. The first act of terrorism was not September 11th, and it was not as dramatic either. It was rather banal and commonplace, as most evil is. A car bomb exploded on the streets of Washington, D.C., September 1976, our bicentennial year. Killed was one innocent American civilian and a Chilean diplomat, killed on our soil. And this act of terrorism was planned and carried out by a foreign power, Chile. Only one American killed that day, compared to the thousands killed almost 25 years later. But that's not the point. The point is that day is not mourned. That day is not remembered. Why? Because our government supported the terrorist network that planted that car bomb. Throughout South America, the U.S. participated in what was called Operation Condor, another groovy codename, and a simple, effective plan. The military regimes in South America banded together, often with the help of the American government via the CIA or the FBI. And the purpose of this Operation Condor? Well, if someone in Chile protested against the military regime there, he'd either be imprisoned or tortured, or else he'd have to flee his country. And where would he go? Perhaps next door to Argentina. And when he got to Argentina with his family, the military regime in Argentina would call the military regime in Chile, and together they'd arrange an assassination, sometimes with the help of an American official there. The same would happen if an outspoken Argentinian had to flee his country and settle, let's say, in Brazil. The Brazilian military regime would call the Argentinian regime, and together again, they'd arrange something. Thus, any vocal opponent of any military regime had no safe haven. Borders did not matter. Hits were carried out all over South America, even Europe. Sometimes, when it was important enough, right here in the US. To think that in 1976, terrorists were here, plotting and planning, walking our tree-lined streets of Washington, D.C. Their target was a man named Orlando Letelier. This crazy radical was in fact a rather straight-laced economist who worked most of his life in a bank. No long hair, no beads, no sandals, no beret and machine gun. A man whose office could well have been the World Trade Center. And what made him so dangerous? His brains and experience. He had served Chile as its foreign minister before the military coup in 1973. Soon afterwards, he was imprisoned and tortured. But international pressure was so great that he was released. Then, Letelier, with his banking and economic skills, led the effort to persuade other governments to stop investing in Chile, stop investing in military regimes. And it began to work. He was making speeches, imploring others to stand strong. He was providing optimism to those Chileans at home who were trying to hang in there. Letelier's passion was to restore democracy to his homeland. So of course some Americans volunteered to help. One such American was his assistant, Ronnie Moffett. She believed in her heart that it was her duty to help others regain their freedom. She was with Letelier when the car bomb went off. She never knew what hit her. She probably felt she was safe here in her own country. These things happened somewhere else, she probably thought. Today we do not memorialize the name Ronnie Moffett and her sacrifice for freedom and democracy. Today we do not mourn Ronnie Moffett, the first American killed here by terrorists. Why is this? Because the School of the Americas graduate planted that car bomb. Because our government supported the terrorists that planted that car bomb. So, It turns out we lost our virginity to a car bomb. Not as cinematic as the direct hit bullseye on the World Trade Center. Perhaps I've ruined something by pointing out that the first attacks here were by soldiers we trained. And too bad. It happened in 1976, before we could videotape it and watch it over and over and discover that part of our new national unity resides in a shared fetish for violent videotape viewing. Can you recall the days before September 11th, the feeling of safety and security? Can you recall your first love, the feeling of calm, confidence? Earlier, I told you about my first love. But what if I was mistaken? No first love existed. What if I lost my virginity another way? What if I were to recall my aunt instead? Drunk, haggard, bloated, reeking of cigarettes and red wine. She's turning on the light in the hall to stumble into my room and briefly under my sheets. If I were to recall that, who'd want to hear it? Learning American history is the same. Beware the light in the hall. The wall-to-wall green carpet was well worn, its color matching the canned string beans I forced myself to swallow earlier at dinner. Now it was dark in the living room, the paneling on the walls drinking in the shimmering light from the TV. Darkness, it was total. The heat was turned up high since it was winter. We were comfortable, silent and warm, eyes fixed straight ahead, sitcoms, Sunday. My sister in the kitchen preparing our Sunday night treat, stirring the hot milk and vanilla pudding mix. During commercials, I'd ask my mom questions about her family. The commercials lasted long enough for her to tell me that she really didn't know much. She remembered that her mom worked very hard in a very noisy factory, came home very tired, was very kind and very funny, and liked Cary Grant very much. About her grandmother, my mom knew absolutely nothing. My mom's dad was a cook in the army, then worked in a shipyard in Philly, then abandoned the family for another woman who was from his homeland of Italy. As the winters passed, my legs grew long and thin. I'd stretch out on the plaid couch and find a hole in the cushion to snuggle my heel into. And during commercials, I'd ask my mom the same questions about her parents and grandparents, and the same 3 or 4 details she'd recount. And once in the woods, hunting with my dad, I asked of his family. He said, "Shh, we're in the woods." Driving home in his clean black Chrysler, he knew little of his grandfather, only that he died of walking pneumonia because he refused to wear a coat in winter. My dad's dad was a sheet metal worker. He hung signage. He changed his last name because he was ashamed of it. When I asked more, my dad just watched the road. How my family got to America from Ireland and Italy is unknown and will remain so forever. Their lives before here, their struggles, their joys, like so much amnesia. Yet as a child, I didn't notice anything missing. After all, I was part of all the families on all the TV shows. But years later, when my brothers and sisters and I used to get together, We'd always end up talking about the family. We'd speculate about our past, inventing scenarios, attempting to make the 3 or 4 details explain all. It didn't work. Because today, my siblings and I, my parents as well, are all lost, disconnected. We have no points from which to navigate, nothing to fall back on, no history. The marrow in our bones is missing. Our blood won't clot. Our love for each other, like the steam rising from that once boiling pot of vanilla pudding, sweet smelling, but elusive. And the families on TV have changed. They're not mine anymore. But in America, the new families on TV are being watched by our newest immigrants. It is estimated that in our country reside over 500,000 Americans who, before arriving here, were tortured in their homeland. Many come from Eastern Europe and Africa, where genocide and the wicked is as common as a box score in a sports page. In the 80s and 90s, though, Central Americans and Southeast Asians arrived here. I see them now in their dark living rooms in Virginia, Wisconsin, Minnesota, California. Love, but silence. Eyes fixed straight ahead. Sitcoms. The painful past to be forgotten. 3 or 4 details shared during a commercial break. But in 5 years, 10 years, when they learn, a young boy of 15 today at 20 may read of U.S. crimes committed in his parents' country. He will learn of his America, who helped kill his granddad in El Salvador. A young woman of 17 may someday learn of her grandma becoming a widow in Cambodia because of illegal bombings. My ancestors escaped famine in Ireland. America caused none of the harm that led my families to leave their homes. Many of today's newest immigrants haven't that luxury, for we were part of their country's calamity. Now, what do we owe that young man or young woman? Anything? What do you think? The dead and the walking dead of their families, do we have a kind word for them or a gesture? Are we really one world? Or in America here, are we simply Cold War champions, holding our trophy aloft? The time is now for us to take full responsibility for our Cold War mistakes and misdeeds. A phantom lives among us, our crimes against humanity. He is our shadow. He knows our names, our favorite movie stars, our favorite beer. He knows where we live. To rid ourselves of this phantom, we need only apologize and take responsibility. It's as if 2 doors are bolted locked in the cellar of our hearts. Rusted iron orange, these doors, once opened, could again connect us to our nation's promise. Our green backyard of childhood, where swing sets protect us, where balls and bats lie strewn about, where dolls and playhouses are fenced in kindly. To apologize and take responsibility. If we can do this, our legacy is guaranteed, our strength and trust replenished. If, however, we are to continue with the status quo, deny, dodge, retreat, posture, then we shall surely perish. The smell of old age and infirmity will grow on us like a stench. Weakened, we will be tracked by wolves, our heels bitten, until one day, as we rest and drink by the lake, we will be taken down. The United States government must initiate, and we the citizens must support, a Cold War Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This needs to be repeated. The United States government must initiate, and we the citizens must support, a Cold War Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Okay, where do we begin? The President shall appoint an 8-person commission. Its mandate? To investigate and report U.S. crimes committed during the Cold War. This Cold War Truth and Reconciliation Commission will be diverse and will represent all sectors of our society. It will include a conservative, a liberal, a business representative, a labor representative, a human rights expert, and a religious leader. That makes 6 appointees so far. The 7th and 8th will be 2 Americans chosen by lottery to serve. They'll represent you and I. This Cold War Truth and Reconciliation Commission must be appointed by the President. It must have an official stamp from the top of our government for credibility. The Commission will have independence and enough cash and power to do its job properly. It will be able to call before it anyone for questioning anyone, from the soldier on the ground to the general who put him there, from the State Department staffer to a Secretary of Defense, even ex-presidents. Why not? But let's be clear, these people are not on trial. They will not be prosecuted for war crimes. Instead, they'll be given amnesty in exchange for their cooperation and testimony. To know the truth, for the sake of history, for the sake of the victims, for the sake of ourselves. This is our need. The Commission will have a limited time to investigate and prepare its report. We don't want this to go on forever, so we'll give them a year. And this is how it starts. Mass publicity announces the Cold War Truth and Reconciliation Commission so everyone knows about it. And the first to appear before the Commission will be any American who before arriving here experienced human rights atrocities linked to our government or to the soldiers we trained. These delicate souls, who we will call the new Americans, if they were tortured or brutalized, or if their families were tortured or brutalized, then we will honor their pain by listening to their stories. We'll give them an arena of dignity to speak the unspeakable. We'll provide them a gentle forum to step forward and grieve. And we will investigate their cases. A team from the Commission will fly to El Salvador or Laos or Guatemala. Obviously, many years have passed, much of the evidence lost, but it's worth the effort, and we must memorialize those we hurt. And when the investigators arrive in these countries, we will hold a public gathering and apologize and ask forgiveness. Meanwhile, back home, the Commission gathers evidence. For example, an academic who specializes in Southeast Asia, or a nun who worked in Central America, or an activist from Amnesty International, they can all give the Commission information. And to be fair, any government official currently serving or retired, or any military official currently serving or retired, they can also give information to the Commission. All sides will be heard. The next stage is the calling of witnesses. The Commission will clear up questions they have or questions we'll have, and they'll hear directly from the sources. Kissinger must appear when called. He'll have the chance to tell his side of the story as he sees it. American business leaders must also appear when called. The motives of our government during the Cold War will be examined. The real threat of Soviet domination will be noted. The fake threat of Soviet domination will also be noted. And in the end, a final report will be issued and handed personally to the President. In it will contain an accurate description of our crimes during the Cold War, the major players involved, the truths revealed, the mistakes made, and the ways to prevent future abuses. The President will then respond with grace and vision, and he'll invite a group of these new Americans to the White House Rose Garden. There, he will apologize and ask forgiveness. There, he will outline what we plan to do to take responsibility. He will announce the following. All new Americans, those brutalized by our government or by soldiers we trained, those who reside with us now, part of our new extended family, will forever be endowed with special rights and privileges. Housing, education, and health will be the three pillars. First, housing relief. That's right, relief. Low rent and low interest home loans. No new American will pay market rates for an apartment or a house. A $900 apartment will cost them $300. And down payments for new homeowners will be reduced. No 10% of $300,000. 2.5% will be the maximum upfront cash needed to be part of the American dream. Their mortgage rate fixed at 5%. Next, education vouchers will be issued to our new Americans and to all of their immediate family who reside here. These vouchers will pay tuition at private schools or parochial schools, or can be used as cash to pay private tutors if our new Americans stay in our public schools. College education will be completely free. State universities like UCLA or private schools like Yale will not cost them a penny. The last area of our responsibility will be devoted to health. Counseling must be available to nurse back to life our wounded birds. Our federal government has already spent $7 million to help victims of torture. But this is not enough. Much of the New Deal for the new Americans will be financed by American business. Why? Because American big business has benefited greatly from our Cold War victory. They now have wide open markets around much of the globe. Let's slow them down just for a moment and make them check their look in the mirror before we demand payment for past services rendered. Our country and its essence does not exist solely for their benefit. Remember that. Our Cold War Truth and Reconciliation Commission will not be perfect, will not cure everything. It will go too far for some, not far enough for others. But in the end, in the very end, it will be proof of our strength and resilience, proof of our ability to rise to the call of honesty and integrity, and finally proof that proof itself guides the hand we place over our hearts as we stand and pledge liberty and justice for all.